In the heart of Victoria Island, Lagos stood a mansion that neighbors whispered about but rarely saw the inside of. They called it the Fortress. Not just because of its towering walls topped with electric wire or the security cameras that tracked every movement along its perimeter, but because of the man who lived inside it. Chief Dominic Nuwari was a name that commanded respect and fear in equal measure across Nigeria. His empire stretched from oil and gas to real estate, from shipping to telecommunications. Politicians sought his endorsement, businessmen courted his partnerships, and society women competed for invitations to his legendary Christmas parties. At 68, he was worth over 2 billion naira, owned properties in London and Dubai, and had a fleet of luxury cars that could fund a small country's annual budget. The mansion itself was a testament to his success. Italian marble floors stretched across rooms larger than most people's entire homes. Crystal chandeliers imported from Austria cast dancing lights across Persian rugs that cost more than a teacher's lifetime salary. The dining room table could seat 20 people, the wine cellar held bottles older than most of his staff, and the master bedroom had a bathroom with gold-plated fixtures and a bathtub carved from a single block of Lebanese marble. Chief Dominic had 3 children from his marriage to the late Mrs. Helen Worry, who had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Uzo, the eldest at 32, was a lawyer who had never practiced law a day in his life. Instead, he spent his time managing his father's legal affairs, which mostly involved using the family name to intimidate smaller businessmen and secure favorable contracts. He drove a brand new Range Rover Sport, wore only imported suits, and had developed a taste for expensive whiskey and younger women. Obinna, 29, was supposed to be the business heir. He had an MBA from London Business School that his father had paid for, but his real talents lay in spending money rather than making it. He owned 3 nightclubs in Lagos that barely broke even, threw parties that made gossip blogs, and changed girlfriends more often than he changed his designer shoes. His weakness was gambling, poker games in private clubs where single bets could buy a house in the middle-class suburbs. Ngozi, the only daughter at 26, was perhaps the cruelest of the 3. Beautiful in the way that money could make anyone beautiful. Professional makeup, designer clothes, expensive skincare treatments, and a body sculpted by personal trainers and cosmetic procedures. She had studied fashion design in Paris, but had never worked a day in her life. Instead, she spent her time shopping, gossiping with other rich daughters, and looking down on anyone she considered beneath her social class. Her Instagram account had over 200,000 followers who envied her luxurious lifestyle, not knowing that every naira she spent came from her father's account. And then there was Amarachi. At 21, she was nearly invisible in the massive house. While the Nori children lived in the main building's spacious bedrooms with en-suite bathrooms and walk-in closets, Amarachi's room was a tiny space beside the generator house, barely large enough for a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a plastic chair. The walls were unpainted concrete, the floor was bare cement, and during the rainy season, water would seep through cracks, forcing her to sleep with buckets strategically placed around her bed. She had arrived at the house 3 years earlier, a shy 18-year-old from a small village in Anambra State. Chief Dominic had introduced her simply as relative's child, who needed a place to stay and work. The story was vague, something about her being an orphan whose grandmother had just died, and Chief Dominic taking her in out of the goodness of his heart. Nobody questioned it. Rich men took in poor relatives all the time. It was considered a noble thing to do, a way of giving back to the community. What they didn't know was that Amarachi's presence in the house was eating Chief Dominic alive. Every morning he would wake up and see her serving breakfast with her head down, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked if he needed anything else. He would watch his children bark orders at her, see them roll their eyes when she spoke, notice how they never said, "please," or "thank you," when she cleaned their rooms or washed their clothes. He remembered the day she had accidentally broken Uzo's favorite whiskey glass, a crystal tumbler that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. Uzo had slapped her so hard that the sound echoed through the dining room, leaving a red handprint on her cheek that lasted for days. "You clumsy village girl," Uzo had shouted. "Do you know how much that glass cost? It's worth more than you'll ever be." Amarachi had simply picked up the pieces with her bare hands, apologizing repeatedly even as tiny shards cut her fingers and drops of blood stained the marble floor. Chief Dominic had watched from the doorway, his hands clenched into fists, saying nothing. He remembered when Ngozi had friends over for her birthday party last year. Amarachi had spent the entire day cooking, cleaning, and decorating. When one of Ngozi's friends complimented the beautiful flower arrangements Ngozi had laughed.
Oh, that.
The maid did it. She's actually not completely useless, unlike most of these village girls. But don't get too impressed. Arranging flowers is about the only thing her small brain can handle. The girls had all laughed while Amarachi stood in the corner, pretending not to hear. He remembered countless other moments. Obina refusing to let her eat at the dining table when guests were around, forcing her to wait in the kitchen until everyone was finished. The way his children's friends would snap their fingers at her like she was a dog, demanding drinks or snacks without even looking at her face. The time Ngozi had thrown away Amarachi's only good dress because she said it was too ugly to be seen in her house, even though Amarachi had saved for months to buy it. But what broke Chief Dominic's heart the most was watching Amarachi accept it all with grace. She never complained, never fought back, never even raised her voice. She would simply nod, apologize when necessary, and retreat to her small room beside the generator, where he sometimes heard her crying softly through the thin walls. She didn't know that he knew. She didn't know that sometimes, late at night, he would stand outside her door and listen to her pray. "God, please help me be strong," she would whisper. "Help me not to hate them. Help me to understand why you brought me here. And please, if there's any way, help me find a real family someday." Those prayers haunted him because he knew the truth that she didn't. 22 years ago, when Chief Dominic was already married to Helen, but their relationship was going through a rough patch, he had gone back to his village for his father's funeral. There he had met Obiegeli, a 16-year-old girl who helped his mother with household chores. She was beautiful in a pure, innocent way that reminded him of Helen when they first met. She was also young, naive, and completely impressed by his wealth and status. What started as casual flirtation became a brief but intense affair. For 2 weeks, while he was in the village settling his father's estate, he would sneak away to meet her. She fell in love with him completely, believing his promises that he would take care of her, that he would find a way for them to be together. When he returned to Lagos, reality hit him like a cold wave. He was already married to a woman from a prominent family. His business empire was just beginning to grow, and he couldn't afford any scandals. So he did what many powerful men do when faced with inconvenient truths. He made the problem disappear. He sent money back to the village, enough to keep Obajuli comfortable, with strict instructions that she should never contact him again. He told himself it was the right thing to do, that everyone would be better off this way. 6 months later, a letter arrived. Obajali was pregnant. Chief Dominic panicked. He sent more money, enough to relocate her to a different state where no one would know her story. He arranged for her to stay with a distant relative, with instructions that the child should be given up for adoption after birth. But fate had other plans. Obajali died during childbirth, her body too young and malnourished to handle the complications. The baby, a girl, survived but was sickly and weak. The distant relative, a poor woman who already had 7 children of her own, couldn't afford another mouth to feed. So she took the baby to Obiagili's grandmother, an old woman living alone in a mud house at the edge of the village. The grandmother, Mama Enchi, was already in her 70s, but she took one look at the baby and saw Chief Dominic's eyes staring back at her. She had known about the affair. Village secrets were hard to keep, but she had also seen how her granddaughter had died heartbroken, abandoned by the man who had promised her everything. "I will raise this child," she declared, "but I will never tell her who her father is until the day I die. Let him live with his choices." For 18 years, Mama Nechi kept that promise. She named the baby Amarachi God's grace and raised her with love, but also with the knowledge that life was hard and unfair. She taught her to cook, clean, sew, and manage a household. She sent her to the village primary school when she could afford the fees. Though Amarachi often had to miss weeks at a time to help with farming or when there was no money for books. Amarachi grew up believing her parents had died in a car accident when she was a baby. She never questioned why she looked different from Mama Kechi, why her skin was lighter and her features sharper. In a village where many children were raised by grandparents, her story wasn't unusual. But as Mama Nkechi grew older and sicker, her guilt began to eat at her. On her deathbed, she finally told Amarachi the truth. "Your father," she whispered through labored breaths, "is Chief Dominic Nori of Lagos. He is a rich man who abandoned your mother when she needed him most. I have his letters, his photographs, everything. When I die, you must take these things to him. You must tell him who you are." Amarachi was devastated. Everything she thought she knew about her life had been a lie, but Mama Nkechi made her promise. "Don't go to him for money," the old woman warned. "Don't go to him expecting love. Go to him so that he can face what he did. Let God judge him for his choices. When Mama Nkechi died 3 days later, Amarachi found herself alone in the world with nothing but a small bag of letters, photographs, and a birth certificate that listed her father as unknown. It took her 6 months to gather the courage and the money for a bus ticket to Lagos. When she finally arrived at the gates of the fortress, she was terrified but determined. The security guard almost turned her away. She looked like just another village girl looking for work. But when she mentioned Chief Dominic's name and said she had important documents to show him, something in her voice made him call the main house. Chief Dominic saw her coming up the driveway and felt his world tilt on its axis. Even from a distance, even though she was dressed in cheap clothes and looked nothing like the polished women in his social circle, he could see Obiajali in her face. More than that, he could see himself, the shape of her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the way she walked with unconscious dignity despite her obvious nervousness. When she handed him the letters and photographs, his hands shook. There, in faded ink, was his own handwriting promising Obiajali a future they would never have. There were pictures of him and Obiajali together, young and laughing, taken with an old camera during those 2 weeks that now felt like a lifetime ago. And there was Obiajali's final letter, written just before she died, forgiving him but asking him to take care of their daughter. Chief Dominic looked at this young woman standing in his opulent living room, and he felt 22 years of suppressed guilt crash over him like a tsunami. This was his daughter, his blood, and she had grown up in poverty while his other children lived in luxury, not because she was worth less, but because he had been too much of a coward to acknowledge her existence. He could have told the truth right then, could have introduced her to his family as his daughter, given her the recognition and inheritance that was rightfully hers, but he was still a coward, still afraid of the scandal, still worried about what people would say. Instead, he created the lie about her being a distant relative in need of help. He told himself it was temporary, that he would figure out the right way to handle the situation later. He gave her a job as a housemaid, reasoning that at least she would be safe and fed while he decided what to do. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. And Chief Dominic found himself trapped in a prison of his own making, watching his legitimate children abuse the daughter he had never acknowledged, unable to protect her without revealing the truth he was too ashamed to tell. The situation became even more complex as he began to see the real character of all his children. Uzo, Obena, and Ngozi had grown up with every advantage money could buy, but they had developed into selfish, entitled, cruel people who looked down on anyone they perceived as beneath them. They spoke to their father with respect only because they needed his money, but he could see the calculation in their eyes, the way they were already dividing up his estate in their minds. Meanwhile, Amarachi, who had every reason to be bitter and angry, showed more genuine kindness and integrity than his other children combined. She worked hard without complaint, treated the other staff with respect, and even tried to take care of him when he wasn't feeling well, bringing him tea and making sure he took his medications. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think Chief Dominic should do next. The turning point came when Chief Dominic was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live, maybe 12 if he was lucky, and agreed to aggressive treatment. At 70, tired and guilt-ridden, he decided he didn't want to spend his final months in hospitals and chemotherapy wards. He wanted to use the time he had left to finally make things right. He began paying closer attention to how his family treated Amarachi, and what he saw made him sick with rage and shame. One evening, he pretended to be napping in his study while Ngozi had friends over for dinner. Amarachi was serving the meal she had spent all day preparing: perfectly seasoned jollof rice, tender beef stew, fried plantains, and a fresh salad with vegetables from the house garden she maintained. "This food is actually quite good," one of Ngozi's friends commented. "Did you cook this yourself?" And Ngozi laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Me, cook. Please, I have better things to do with my time." The maid made it. She's actually useful for something, unlike most of these village girls who don't know the difference between salt and sugar. "Where did you find her?" another friend asked. "Oh, she's some distant relative my father took pity on." You know how these rich men feel they have to save every poor person in their village. Personally, I think we already do enough charity work without having them live in our house, but what can you do? Amarachi was standing right there, holding a tray pretending not to hear as they discussed her like she was a piece of furniture. At least she knows her place, the first friend said. Some of these housemaids get too comfortable and start thinking they're part of the family. Oh, this one would never, Ngozi assured her. She's far too stupid for that, and even if she tried, we'd put her back in her corner quickly enough. They all laughed while Amarachi quietly refilled their wine glasses, her face carefully blank. Later that night, Chief Dominic heard her crying in her room again, and he made his decision. He called his lawyer the next morning. Barrister Ameko Kefer had been handling the Nwori family's legal affairs for over 15 years. He was discreet, professional, and completely trustworthy, qualities that had made him very wealthy and very careful about the secrets he kept. I want to change my will, Chief Dominic told him during their private meeting in his study. And I want to arrange for some DNA tests to be done quietly. Barrister Okafor had seen many strange requests from wealthy clients over the years, but something in Chief Dominic's tone made him pay extra attention. What kind of changes are we talking about, Chief? Chief Dominic pulled out the old letters and photographs, the same ones Amarachi had brought to him 3 years earlier. He told the lawyer the whole story about Obiageli, about Amarachi, about the lie he had been living with for over 20 years. I want to leave everything to her, he said simply. Everything, the houses, the businesses, the investments, the cars, all of it. And I want to include a full confession in the will, explaining who she really is and why she deserves it all. Barrister Okafor was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Chief, are you sure about this? Your other children, they won't take this well. They could contest the will, claim you weren't of sound mind. Let them try, Chief Dominic said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I have DNA evidence, documents, witnesses. And more than that, I have 3 years of watching how they've treated her compared to how she's treated me. She's the only one who deserves what I've built. What about partial inheritance? You could give her a significant portion while still leaving something for the others. Chief Dominic shook his head. They've had their inheritance their entire lives. Every meal they've eaten, every school they've attended, every car they've driven, every trip they've taken. All of it came from my money. They've been spending their inheritance for 30 years. Now it's her turn. The DNA test was arranged discreetly, samples taken from hair and Amarachi's brush and compared to Chief Dominic's blood during one of his medical checkups. The results came back with 99.97% certainty. She was definitely his daughter. Chief Dominic also arranged for a video recording to be made, a final message to be played after the will was read. He recorded in the hospital during one of his chemotherapy sessions when he was thin and weak, but his mind was perfectly clear. I am Chief Dominic Nwori, he said to the camera, his voice steady despite his physical frailty. I am of sound mind and body, though my body is failing me. I want to make a confession and explain my final will and testament. 22 years ago, I committed a grave sin. I had an affair with a young woman named Obiageli Okafor in my home village. When she became pregnant, I abandoned her, sending money but refusing to acknowledge my responsibility. She died giving birth to my daughter, Amarachi, who was raised by her grandmother in poverty, while my other children lived in luxury. 3 years ago, Amarachi came to my house, not knowing who I was, seeking only the truth about her parentage. I brought her into my home, but lied about her identity. Too much of a coward to admit what I had done. I watched my other children treat her like a servant, abuse her, humiliate her, while she showed more grace and dignity than any of them have ever possessed. I have watched all my children for 3 years. I have seen their true characters. Uzo is lazy and entitled, living off money he has never earned while treating those beneath him with cruelty. Obinna is a gambler and a wastrel who has never worked an honest day in his life. Ngozi is vain and heartless, caring only for material things and social status. But Amarachi, my true daughter, my blood, has worked hard every day without complaint. She has shown kindness to everyone in this house, including me, even when she had no reason to. She has never asked for anything she didn't earn. She deserves everything I have built and more. I leave my entire estate to Amarachi, no worry, my daughter and my heir. To my other children, I leave this advice: learn what it means to work for what you have. Learn what it means to treat people with dignity regardless of their station in life. And learn that blood means nothing without character to back it up. The recording was sealed and placed with the will, to be played only after Chief Dominic's death. He lived for 8 more months, long enough to see Christmas one more time. During those months, he tried in small ways to make Amarachi's life easier without arousing suspicion. He made sure she had better food, quietly arranged for her small room to be renovated and furnished more comfortably, and even bought her some new clothes, claiming they were cast-offs from his deceased wife that shouldn't go to waste. His other children barely noticed. They were too busy positioning themselves for the inheritance they assumed was coming their way. Chief Dominic died on a Tuesday morning in January peacefully in his sleep. Amarachi found him when she brought his morning tea, and she was the one who called the doctor, who called the family. Within hours, the house was full of relatives who hadn't visited in years. Cousins flew in from Abuja and Port Harcourt, aunts and uncles emerged from villages across the southeast, and family friends who had barely spoken to Chief Dominic in life suddenly appeared to pay their respects. The funeral was a grand affair befitting a man of Chief Dominic's stature. Politicians gave speeches, business associates shared memories, and society pages documented every detail of the ceremony. Amarachi worked tirelessly during the 3-day wake, cooking for hundreds of guests, cleaning, organizing, making sure everything ran smoothly. Nobody thanked her. She was still just the housemaid to them. The will reading was scheduled for the Saturday after the burial in the mansion's main living room. Barrister Okafor had insisted on reading it there rather than in his office, claiming Chief Dominic had specifically requested it. By noon, the room was packed. Uzo sat in his father's favorite chair, already acting like the man of the house. Obinna had brought his current girlfriend, an Instagram model who kept taking selfies despite the solemn occasion. Ngozi wore black designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's cars, her makeup perfect even though she had supposedly been crying all week. Extended family members filled the sofas and chairs, all of them calculating their potential shares. Cousins who had never liked each other suddenly sat together, united in their anticipation of windfall money. Aunts whispered about how they would finally be able to renovate their houses or send their children to private schools. Amarachi stood at the back of the room, holding a tray of drinks as usual, trying to make herself invisible. Some of the relatives had been particularly cruel to her during the funeral preparations, treating her like hired help and snapping orders at her constantly. Barrister Okafor entered the room carrying a briefcase and a laptop computer, followed by his assistant with a video projector. The unusual equipment raised some eyebrows, but people assumed it was just modern legal procedure. "Thank you all for coming," the lawyer began, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "Before I read Chief Dominic Nori's final will and testament, he requested that I play a video message he recorded before his death. He set up the projector and dimmed the lights. Chief Dominic's image appeared on the wall, sitting in a hospital bed but looking directly into the camera with clear, determined eyes. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "I am Chief Dominic Mori. I am of sound mind and body, though my body is failing me." As the recording continued, the atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. When Chief Dominic revealed the truth about Amarachi's parentage, gas echoed through the space. When he described how his other children had treated her, several relatives turned to stare at Uzo, Obinna, and Ngozi with shocked expressions. But it was his final words that caused the real explosion. "I leave my entire estate to Amarachi Nori, my daughter, and my heir." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. "This is impossible!" Uzo shouted, jumping to his feet so violently that he knocked over his chair. "That girl is not our sister! This is some kind of fraud! She seduced him!" Ngozi screamed, her perfect makeup already running with tears of rage. "She's a witch!" She used juju to manipulate his mind when Obinna was on his feet too, his face red with fury. "We'll contest this! No court in Nigeria will uphold this madness! She's a housemaid! A nobody!" But Barrister Okafor was ready for their objections. From his briefcase, he produced the DNA test results, certified by 2 different laboratories. He showed them the original letters in Chief Dominic's handwriting. He presented photographs and sworn affidavits from people in the village who remembered Obojali and her affair with Chief Dominic. "Your father prepared for every possible challenge," he told them calmly. "This will is ironclad. And if you attempt to contest it, there are provisions for legal action against anyone who tries to interfere with Amarachi's inheritance." The extended family members were stunned into silence. Their dreams of easy money evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. Some of them began looking at Amarachi with new eyes, realizing they had been rude to the person who now controlled the family fortune. But Amarachi herself was in shock. She had dropped the tray she was holding, glasses shattering on the marble floor, and was staring at the projection screen where her father's image had been just moments before. Tears streamed down her face as the full weight of the revelation hit her. Not only was she Chief Dominic's daughter, but he had known all along. He had watched her suffer for 3 years, knowing she was his child and had done nothing to stop it. The betrayal was almost as painful as the vindication. This won't stand, Uzo said, his voice low and dangerous. I don't care what papers you have. She's not getting a single kobo of our father's money. It's not your father's money anymore, Barrister Okefor replied. As of this moment, it belongs to Amarachi. And I should warn you that your father included specific instructions about what should happen if any of you try to interfere with her inheritance or cause her any harm. He pulled out another document. Any family member who contests the will, threatens Amarachi, or attempts to prevent her from claiming her inheritance will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Chief Dominic set aside money specifically for legal fees to ensure you can't use the family's wealth against her. Ngozi was crying hysterically now, her designer clothes wrinkled and her hair disheveled. She can't just take everything! What about us? What are we supposed to do? Get jobs, Amarachi said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken since the reading began, and her voice was stronger than anyone had ever heard it. Learn what it means to work for what you have. She was quoting their father's words from the video, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Over the following weeks, the true extent of Amarachi's inheritance became clear. The mansion alone was worth over 300 million naira. Chief Dominic's business interests included shares in banks, oil companies, and telecommunications firms worth billions. There were properties in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and London. Cars, jewelry, art collections, and investment accounts that most people couldn't even comprehend. Overnight, Amarachi had become one of the wealthiest young women in Nigeria. But wealth, she quickly learned, brought its own problems. Uzo, Obinna, and Ngozi didn't simply accept their disinheritance and move on. Despite the legal warnings, they began a campaign of harassment and intimidation designed to make Amarachi's life so miserable that she would give up the inheritance voluntarily. They started by trying to turn the household staff against her. Uzo cornered the gardener and the cook, telling them that Amarachi was a fake who had somehow tricked their father and that when he regained control of the house, he would fire anyone who showed her loyalty. But the staff had watched how Amarachi treated them over the past 3 years. Compared to how the Nwori children had behaved, they chose to support the young woman who had always said, please, and thank you, who remembered their birthdays and asked about their families over the siblings who had never even learned their names. When psychological pressure didn't work, the siblings escalated to more direct tactics. They hired private investigators to dig up dirt on Amarachi, hoping to find something, anything, that could be used to challenge her character in court. They found nothing. Her record was spotless, her reputation in her home village was excellent, and even her grandmother's neighbors remembered her as a respectful, hard-working girl who had cared for the old woman until her death. Frustrated by their lack of legal options, they began spreading rumors in Lagos high society. They told anyone who would listen that Amarachi was a gold digger who had somehow manipulated their father into changing his will. They claimed she had used traditional medicine, juju, to control his mind. They suggested she had sexual relations with the old man to gain his favor. The rumors were vicious and persistent, but they backfired spectacularly. Lagos society loves gossip, but it also loves the underdog story of a poor girl who rises to wealth and power. Many people remembered how the Nwori children had behaved when their father was alive, their arrogance, their wasteful spending, their treatment of service workers. The contrast with Amarachi's quiet dignity made it clear who the real villains in this story were. More importantly, Amarachi wasn't the defenseless housemaid she had been 6 months earlier. She now had access to the best lawyers in Nigeria, security personnel, and advisors who helped her navigate her new reality. When the siblings' rumors became too persistent, she had her lawyers send cease and desist letters backed by the threat of defamation lawsuits. But the breaking point came when they tried to physically intimidate her. 3 months after the will reading, Amarachi was leaving a business meeting in Victoria Island when she was confronted by Obinna and several of his friends outside the office building. They surrounded her car, preventing her from leaving, while Obinna leaned against her window, making threats. You think you've won, he said, his face twisted with hatred. You think having money makes you one of us. You're still just a village girl playing dress up. And when we're done with you, you'll be begging us to take back what's rightfully ours. What Obinna didn't know was that Amarachi's new security team included former military personnel who took threats against their client very seriously. Within minutes, her bodyguards had dispersed his friends, and Obinna found himself face down on the pavement with his hands tied behind his back. The police arrived shortly after, along with news photographers who had been tipped off about the confrontation. Pictures of Obinna being arrested outside a Victoria Island office building made the front pages of several newspapers the next day, along with stories about the ongoing family feud over Chief Dominic's will. That incident marked the beginning of the end for the Nori siblings' resistance. Amarachi had been patient up to that point, trying to give her half-siblings time to accept their new reality. But attempted physical intimidation crossed a line. She instructed her lawyers to take off the gloves. First, they had Obinna charged with criminal intimidation and assault. Despite his family's connections, the evidence was overwhelming. Security cameras had captured the entire incident, and there were multiple witnesses. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison, though he served only 3 before being released on parole. The arrest and trial destroyed what remained of Obinna's social reputation. His gambling debts, which he had previously been able to manage through his father's money, suddenly became unmanageable. His nightclubs, which had always operated at a loss, were forced to close. His fair weather friends disappeared, and his girlfriend left him for a politician's son with better prospects. Within a year of the will reading, Obinna was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Surulere, working as a manager at someone else's club and trying to rebuild his life from scratch. But it was Ngozi's fate that provided the most satisfying justice. Of the 3 siblings, she had been the cruelest to Amarachi, the most vocal in her belief that poor people deserved their circumstances, and the most resistant to the idea that she should work for her living. When her father's money disappeared, Ngozi's social media lifestyle became impossible to maintain. She could no longer afford designer clothes, exotic vacations, or the professional beauty treatments that had maintained her appearance. Her Instagram followers, who had envied her luxurious lifestyle, began to notice that her posts became less frequent and less impressive. She tried to maintain appearances by borrowing money, but Lagos high society is surprisingly small and gossipy. Word spread quickly that Ngozi Nori was broke and desperate, trying to borrow money from anyone who would listen to her sob stories about being cheated out of her inheritance.